So there was a bit of like humility and learning how to be humble and struggle and scrape and scrap to get by, to put food on the table, to keep the lights on, because I went from, $100 million vertical high-rise buildings in downtown San Diego as the developer on the developer side to begging for like a small bathroom addition commission on someone's house in our neighborhood.
Welcome to the No One Ever Told Me podcast, where we talk about the things that no one ever tells you that you really need to know to be successful and to thrive in business and in leadership. Today, my guest is Jared Bradley. Jared is the president and founder of the Bradley Projects, the Bradley Development Group, and Certified Construction Services. That's right, 3 separate companies that are focused on building in urban growth areas with a focus on context and a heart for community. Together, these companies are teaming up to change the Nashville skyline, one project at a time. Jared, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here. Let's get started. Would you just tell us your story?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, by the way, Matt. Seems like a lot of fun we're going to have here.
Yeah, man.
I'm an architect and a real estate developer and a general contractor, which is fairly unique set of skill sets. And we have 3 separate companies: the Bradley Projects, which is our architectural firm. We have the Bradley Development Group, which is our real estate development arm. And then we have Certified Construction Services, which is a full-scale general contracting company. So that's a lot to kind of deal with. By any stretch, of the imagination here. But, the big thing for kind of my story is that it just didn't happen all at once. The backstory to it is 20 years in the making, maybe even longer.
Yeah. And
so we, basically I started off as just a kid from Kentucky, like Western Kentucky, avid skateboarder, still am. It's a big part of my life. It's a big part of growing up in Western Kentucky, oddly enough. And then part of that is, growing up in Kentucky was such a progressive sport. This was the 1980s too, by the way.
Yeah.
So the first thing was, well, how do I get out of here? Like, what's the fastest track out of Western Kentucky? No offense to Kentucky, just that's not where my mind was. It was in Southern California. And so kind of fast forwarding through teen angst years, I was able to get into the State University of Kentucky School of Architecture, which was, to me, an incredible feat. I didn't know much about architecture at that point. I didn't have these like grand schemes when I was younger that I wanted to be an architect. I knew from the beginning. I played Lincoln Logs. Yeah, it didn't happen for me.
Yeah.
I found that I think skateboarding, just the whole initiative in the 80s of creating things and inventing things and looking at like the things that people don't see, in spaces, in forms, and just all our entire environment. I think that really formed the architectural background in a weird kind of way.
And when we had coffee a few weeks ago, you said the University of Kentucky has like a premier architecture program, and you didn't know that. I didn't know that either. No idea.
I went because it's the only school I could afford.
Yes.
And I barely got in because as a skateboarder, I didn't like focus on my studies as I should have. And I thought, I was in the dormitory my first year in college, and I remember a guy said, he said he was in the School of Architecture, and I thought, well, that sounded interesting. I was always good at drafting and sort of some of those industrial arts type programs in school, accelerated at those in high school. And so he said, you should give it a shot. And I said, well, okay. And fascinatingly, there's an entrance exam. Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, I'll go in there and I have no idea what I'm doing. And I remember, he said, just pretend like you're on actually what he said was pretend you're on an acid trip, which I'd never done that, obviously. But I knew what he was saying. He said, it's just a bizarre test. Mm-hmm. So I took the exam and it was nothing like I thought. It was draw your hand while you're drawing. It was, here are 3 pieces of cardboard. Build a 3-dimensional representation of the word void. And just these bizarre challenges.
Yeah.
Apparently I did pretty well, got into the school from that. And then, as soon as we all went through this program, it was all of these great architects from Paris, from Switzerland, I rarely had a United States-based professor. That's crazy for a kid like me in Western Kentucky. And I got exposed to this world of international architecture. So, of course, all of us graduating from that school, it's like, how fast can we get out of here and go to New York or LA or to Europe or whatever. I just happened to tell the dean of the school that I really needed good weather, modern architecture. And that's when he said, we have an alumni in La Jolla, California. And I didn't think that sounded awful.
Yeah.
So I flew out there and, the rest is sort of history. That's kind of where I started my career when I was about 21, 22 years old.
It's a long leap from skateboard kid to I now have these 3 separate businesses all working in concert. So continue telling the story, because it's all steps and processes. What happened? Yeah. What happened after La Jolla?
Well, there's a guy named Mark Steele who's a fellow in the American Institute of Architects who took me under his wing. And Mark to this day is one of my biggest mentors and someone who really made me kind of the professional that I am today in terms of how I sort of emulate and model my business practices and how I treat people.
Yeah.
He was such a driving force to me at such a formidable years of my life. And the way he just would get in front of an audience and sort of really command this sort of respect and posture by being sensitive to people's needs and their concerns and really thinking about context. And we'd get in these crazy community group meetings where people are just irate about the developer that we happen to be working for as the architect. Remember that he's the architect. And so he had to go in there and basically take the torches and the pitchforks thrown at him. But he would do it with such grace. And he would be he would just listen. And he always told me people are going to come at these things and always come at you as an architect with mostly fears. And what are they really afraid of losing, or what are they really afraid of what's going to happen? If you listen, you can quietly and carefully kind of help them by meeting them where they're at and really kind of trying to dispel these misbeliefs or these issues that they're concerned with.
Yeah.
That and the fact that he always took initiative in young people and raising up the next generation. That's something, giving back is something he always did in so many generous ways. And so I learned how to be a great architect through him. And being a great architect is not only pushing progressive bounds of design and space and things that we haven't even thought about yet, but it's also about the human condition. It's about how do you take care of people. And really it's how do you serve people. We are servants as architects. And I don't think that architecture school didn't teach me that. Mark Steele taught me that. Architecture school taught me ego and how to think I'm the greatest. The real world showed up and kicked me in the teeth and said, maybe you're not Frank Gehry just yet.
Yeah.
I should probably back up a little bit because after Mark Steele, I realized at some point in my career, as great as all that was going, I saw sort of the writing on the walls that, for me personally, being an architect in today's world was very challenging. It meant that I had to sort of ironically be very subordinate, be in a very subordinate role to the whole process. And that's because the development world has sort of really taken off and steamrolled into, such a driving force with economics and the financial models. And that's critical, obviously. But from an architectural perspective, it's gotten a little lopsided and one-sided. And so that's why I think we see such problems in our urban environments now, is that we've taken the focus off of the architecture and design and we've put it all in economics. And you go to Europe, you don't see that so much. You see a lot of diversity in culture, a lot of diversity in art and those types of things. So I just immediately realized after about 5 years with Mark that I needed to, if I couldn't beat him, I needed to join him. So I went to work for a very well-known real estate developer in downtown San Diego and did sort of my MBA into development world, the hard way. And then so just right after that, after that little run and development, just as, suit and tie every day, I told my wife, I think it's time that we start something on our own. And that's when we started an architectural practice in a real estate development company. The sole purpose of the architectural practice was to fuel the real estate company. And it wasn't long after that we realized we are so entrenched into these projects. Why are we not building them? Yeah. And so to sort of fast forward through all of that, I ended up studying and becoming a general contractor in the state of California. And then we started sort of vertically integrating all of our work in that manner.
So, I mean, that's a part of the story I'm actually really curious about. Like, what were the heartaches and the passions and the complicated conversations to pull out of, like, you know, you've got a job, you're going to get a paycheck every week, to, oh man, I think we got to go like put a bet on ourselves and see if we can do this. Like, so tell me about some of those conversations.
Yeah. I mean, I wish I could say that someone just said, here's $500,000. Why don't you go start a company? That just didn't, I mean, it does happen, I guess. It wasn't in my cards.
Yep.
It was more like, let's take what we've learned. I think I was a bit naive too. I think the funny part of all this was that here I am leaving, high-rise developments. I was, working with Mark Steele with like the San Diego Chargers on their new football stadium, to these like incredibly powerful people and these great projects that were just inspirational, to crickets. Like, here I am, look at me, guys. And no one showed up, It was a little bit naive to think that I was going to do that. So there was a bit of like humility and learning how to be humble and struggle and scrape and scrap to get by, to put food on the table, to keep the lights on, because I went from, $100 million vertical high-rise buildings in downtown San Diego as the developer, on the developer side, to begging for like a small bathroom addition commission on someone's house in our neighborhood. So the pendulum swung, and it swung hard.
It's a big step back.
It is.
We're several years removed from those decisions. Would you do anything different?
I mean, the glamorous thing to say is no, man. I earned it all. But honestly, I don't think I would.
Yeah.
I think that's sort of a loaded question. I've gained so much in my failures.
Yeah.
And they haven't been huge failures, but there's been a lot of, I would call them non-wins. And I think that's strengthened us as a group. And it's also, I think, allowed me to see the bigger picture, which is a team effort. And, so many companies and corporations are built with the guy.
Yeah.
And I've tried to start a company where I don't want to be the guy. It's about our team. And if I can partner with some of the best and greatest people and surround myself with people who trust each other, people who are loyal to each other, people who respect each other, and then take that a step further, like, how can I serve the people that work for me or with me? And if I'm, again, taking that attitude that an architect should be a servant, how do I serve those that are on my team so they can do what they do best? There's a really great architect who runs the firm Big, Bjargs Ingel, and he, I love he was on 60 Minutes or something. He's like one of the biggest architects out there. And I found so much truth when he said, my job as the architect, and remember, he's got like 300, 400, I don't know how many people he's got in his firm now, but his job as the architect is to make sure, his only job is to make sure that the best idea gets implemented. Not his idea, but the best idea. And that, that's something I had been doing for a while, but just never putting a label on it.
Yeah.
And I think as a company, I don't care if it's the guys that are out doing the labor, digging ditches, or, the guys at the bank or the lenders or my equity partners or my whoever it is, if they have a great idea, we need to listen.
Yeah.
And that idea needs to be implemented.
You kind of talked about in a previous conversation we had that success is really about team. So unpack that idea of what success looks like for you, because I think it's a lot of what you're talking about.
Yeah. My belief in God and my faith is really what drives me day one, every single day. And there's days it gets away from us, as we all know, but really, like, I think this heart of a servant as a leader, this servant leadership, which is sort of like, for a while it was a trendy term.
Sure.
But it's a real thing. And I think if your people that work with you, and I always say with you instead of for you, if the people that work with you can see you serving them, they emulate that to the people that are sort of, quote, under them.
Right.
And it's sort of this sort of top-down trickling of serving others, instead of the guy at the very bottom of the totem pole thinking, I'm just here to serve my master, so to speak. It's the other way around. Like, I tell people all the time, and this is sort of a confusing statement, but there's some meaning behind it. I say all the time, like, to our project managers particularly, I would fire you before I'll fire the guy digging the ditch. particularly if you're treating that guy like to reiterate how valuable that person is
That's right.
to our team. We're only as good as the people working with us, and everyone contributes so much to all of our projects. It's not just the guys at the top. And I really have sort of taken this approach of, trying to elevate those around me instead of myself. And that's why I don't even like doing interviews like this, because I usually leave them thinking, I feel kind of like I've talked too much about ourselves, but
no, these are great stories, man. So obviously working in San Diego with those, really high net worth individuals and really high revenue organizations, ego is a bit of a problem. How have you managed to kind of keep that humility and kind of keep that team first mentality in your organization? Because that's a major culture shift from what corporate America is doing.
Yeah. I mean, I had some ego problems. Not going to lie.
Okay. Is that common with architects?
I think it's very common. I think, in fact, today, there's even a part of me that I don't even like to say I'm an architect.
Sure.
I'd like to say that we do buildings. And I mean that for a bunch of different reasons. But by and large, the architectural profession has been known to be fairly full of prima donnas and a lot of strong opinions and actually a lot of elitism. Now, from an artistic standpoint, I would agree that there's a place for that. Like, I think that we are experts. We are art critics. We are building art. Our buildings should be art. And we have the right to critique others' work, in that realm. But at the same time, I sort of feel like that has gone a little bit too far as well. So again, backing up to when I first started, I bet Mark Steele could sit here and tell you some great stories about my ego and how he had to, I bet it was just the most obnoxious thing for him to deal with. He has to deal with it every time he hires a new, young, talented person. And so I think that over the years, I think going to the development world was an immediate kick in the teeth. That was an immediate, wait a second, you are way down here on the totem pole. And that hierarchy gets into your soul and your inner being, and you get caught up in that. I have had so many rough nights and late nights and battling with demons type stuff that the way that I've kind of gotten past all that, again, is leaning into my faith. It's a huge part of my daily activities. If I don't do that, I'm not going to be a great leader.
Yeah.
If I don't stop and focus on those around me and helping those around me, I'm going to get all caught up in me. And like, how am I going to make myself happy? What am I going to get out of this today? Instead of what can I do for someone else that they can get something out of the day? So I think taking the focus off myself and trying to do that, I mean, I have to do that literally. I have to do that very consciously. I have to make an effort to do that.
Yeah, that's a different kind of leadership, right?
That's right.
And I think that carries over into the different kind of work that you guys do with the Bradley Group. So the podcast comes from Nashville, and like a lot of fast-growing, mid-size communities, gentrification is a major challenge. But you were intentional with the kind of development you wanted to do. So talk about the good work you do in development with considerations for the populations who are typically disenfranchised by development.
Yeah, we, going back to, it started in San Diego because, maybe architecture school, but architecture school was more about pushing boundaries of art and architecture. In San Diego, I learned pretty quickly, coming from Western Kentucky, which is mostly white and not very diverse, going to Southern California and being immersed into that culture, number one, there's incredible diversity, which is just a wonderful thing. And just is just really what I think. I mean, life is all about. I mean, when I think about all the people and all the relationships I've had in San Diego, and the diversity there, and people from Europe to Mexico to whatever, it's just beautiful, right? I was immediately open up to that, but it was like, finally, my people. These are my people, and it felt great. And then I was immediately introduced to extreme poverty in the inner city. And Mark Steele was also a sort of a guiding force in opening my eyes to issues of affordable housing, issues of revitalizing communities without over-gentrifying them or gentrifying them in a bad way. I think that's another word that's been misused a lot, but gentrification isn't a bad thing, but displacement is. So we don't want to displace families and culture and people and history. So development needs to think about all these cultural issues. And I think sort of thinking about all that in my career, that exposure to to these different parts of our community in downtown San Diego, the first thing I did when I moved to Nashville, I had an African-American partner at that time, and he said, brother, I want to take you to the hood. And I said, well, let's go. And I remember when I got here, he drove me down Jefferson Street. This was 8 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I remember thinking, I said, well, when are we going to get there? And he's like, man, we're here. Are you crazy? And I'm like, man, this is the most beautiful part of our city. This is not the hood. This is not Compton. From that moment on, I mean, the day I got here, I got really involved in North Nashville. And to this day, we're involved in North Nashville. And so we look at communities here locally where we can be effective and where we can be helpful. Obviously, we've got to go out and raise money. It's got to make economic sense. Mm-hmm. But we don't have to raise the profit bar to the point where we're sucking it out of the people who need our help, right? Yep. So it's about balance. It's about working with our local government, our city council members. The mayor's office has been great. Every administration we've worked with has been great to work with on raising awareness, but also raising capital through tax increment financing and other types of structures where we can go in and do better work, raise the bar instead of just giving sort of mediocrity to these parts of town, and really help tell the story that's already in those communities, the history in those communities.
That's so good. I love that. That's such a great perspective. So the podcast is called No One Ever Told Me, right? There are just some lessons you have to learn the hard way. Becoming a business owner, now an owner of 3 related but separate businesses, what are the things that no one ever told you that you really needed to know to be successful in this business?
I kind of think my life's motto, and which is sort of filtered into our company's motto, is just don't take yourself so seriously.
Yeah.
Like I grew up white knuckling everything, just struggling and scraping and scrapping. And I'm not saying we're not doing that today. I'm just saying that it's life. We only have so many years on this planet, and we have got to step back and laugh at ourselves, and that's also counter to the business culture that we're in today. Mm-hmm. And we all put on this stoic front, like we've got it all together. Our company's the best, man. We never make a mistake. It's just not true. We're human. We make mistakes all the time. It's how do you finish? How do you finish strong? And also, when you make the mistakes, what do you do to correct them? It's, and it's how you react to all this stuff that makes our business. And I think, again, by not taking yourself seriously, we take ourselves seriously. I shouldn't say that. But by not taking yourself so seriously, you get to a place where you start relying on each other more, and you can be a little more vulnerable with your team, and you can let your team know you're struggling. It's okay to let some of the guys that are working with you as your project managers or whoever, let them know, like, I'm having a tough day, man. And they can read it, but then if you're sort of at that level of servanthood, and you can say, and you can vocalize, and you can actually communicate to them, dude, I am not having a good day. It's different when your leader tells you that than you just having to feel that. Because when you're left to feel that, you don't know if it's something you did or is the company in shambles or whatever. Instead of just saying, man, I'm not great today.
Yeah.
And to have a leader tell you that no one ever told me. I think Mark Steele would tell me sometimes I'm not having a great day, but he also, kind of kept it a little bit at bay.
Kind of talk about this idea of risk sometimes. And I think it was Warren Buffett that said risk comes from not knowing what you're doing. How do you build competency in such a competitive market?
The funny thing is that first of all, Warren Buffett's, he's absolutely right about that. I mean, there's no way that you're going to be successful if you don't know the content, if you don't know the information, if you don't research and study and belabor all of that. I think the biggest thing for me is that we just work hard. And I'm not saying you can work your way around things. You have to be good. You have to be talented. You have to know your topics. You have to know the content of what you're talking about. But at the same time, like, I can promise you that everyone on our team, I don't know, you can't outwork them. We will outwork the next competitor. And now I don't rely the success of our company on just hard work. I don't think you can build a company on hard work alone. But I can tell you that's probably one of the key factors that separate us from other companies is that we serve others first, and no one's going to outwork us. Like, we take it easy sometimes, but when it's time to pony up and show up. Our team is going to work the hardest. Otherwise, you're not going to be on our team. It's sort of like part of who we are. Yeah. It's in our culture,
We'll wrap up with this question because I think encouraging the next generation, you talk about Mark's mentorship relationship with you.
Yeah.
If there are younger people out there who are like, man, I think I want to take a chance on myself. I'm working this corporate 9-to-5 job, but maybe I should go start my own firm like Jared did. How do you encourage younger people who potentially want to take that risk? What's the first step they should take? What should they be thinking about?
Yeah, I love that question because this recent pandemic that we're in right now, I've had a lot of phone calls from some young architects that have been laid off basically, and they're like, I'm going to go hang my own shingle, and it's really inspiring to listen to because I've been there.
Yeah,
and I just offer words of encouragement, but the words of encouragement kind of go like this. It's a little bit like, keep your expectations where they need to be right now. Plan on working extremely hard, and don't get shocked if it's a struggle. I mean, I think nowadays we're so caught up in instant gratification and saying, I'm going to go do this or I'm going to go do that. You have to give yourself an immense amount of flexibility to grow, to pivot, to change. But the main thing is find out what you do best and go towards that as sort of like your anchor. But just be ready for some flexibility because it's not what we started in 2006 is not anywhere where I thought we'd be. I mean, it couldn't be more different today than what we put pen to paper.
Yeah.
I think the theory is there, but I would have never, in 2006, I could have never imagined what we're doing now. It's fascinating, but I was forced into flexibility.
Yeah.
I think nowadays, if I could tell anyone anything, I would say just plan on being flexible and don't plan on, just instantly knocking it out of the park.
That's good.
I think everybody's going to have to do their fair share of bathroom additions.
Yeah, that's right.
It's good
in
for
whatever industry you're in. That's right.
That's right.
You got to clean the toilet sometimes.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, Jared, thanks a ton for sharing your story. Thanks for encouraging our listeners with everything you've worked through. We're so glad to have you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
You got it. You've got to love the skateboard kid turned architect turned business owner story. What an encouragement. I especially appreciate Jared's focus on humility and his team-first approach to success. I know I'll be putting these ideas into practice this week. As always, please share and subscribe and make sure you join us for the next episode of the No One Ever Told Me podcast.